Hi everyone, I'm Cadet Johanna Western, your Professional Development Training Officer.
And I am Cadet Emily Rowley, and I'm the Bravo Flight Commander. And this is Aircast. This week we'll be discussing the enlisted side of the Air Force with Cadet Brown. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello everyone, this is Cadet Major Brown. I am the Operations Squadron 2 Commander. I'm excited to be here today.
All right, so first question is, how long were you enlisted for and what was your job there?
So I was enlisted for almost 5 years in the Air Force Reserves, and my FSC was Security Forces.
So you were in it for 5 years, so what did you do during that time?
In that time, I actually had one deployment. Traditionally, as a traditional reservist, I would do 1 week in a month and then 2 weeks in the summer. So I got to travel several different countries throughout that time, and really got to see not only the security forces side, but other career fields and kind of what they do in the Air Force.
Cool. So what did you retire as then?
So I was an NCO, so E5.
Cool.
So I was a staff sergeant. Put it on for a few months right before I contracted with ROTC.
You made it and then you're like, I'm out.
Still put it on my resume.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Best part to help out.
So how does that work being in AFROTC? Did you have to kind of separate, or what was the deal?
Once you contract, you have to separate from whatever contract you're with. So if you're in the Guard or even in the Reserves or even active duty, I think essentially you have to get a conditional release, which relieves you of your previous contract, and you pretty much start right up like a regular AFROTC contract.
Interesting. So you really can't do reserve and be contracted at the same time?
So yeah, you can't be contracted. They can't pay you both. So once I started receiving my stipend, they had to stop paying me through drill as a reservist. So that was kind of like the defining moment of, hey, you're done with being enlisted. Now you're a POC. You are contracted, so you're done with your contract with the reserves.
If only you could have got 2 paychecks from that.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm sure that you probably make a little bit more as a reservist, like an E5.
So, shockingly enough, I'd actually make more money from the stipend. So
Really?
It was a pay raise.
Wow.
That's actually
so
interesting.
It was actually kind of nice.
Jeez, all right.
I actually didn't know that.
So as a reservist, did you have another job as well, on the civilian side?
So most do. I was a student and just kind of worked part-time. A lot of the members of my unit were obviously police officers or some sort of security, but I mean it varied so much. That was one of the best parts of being as a reservist was, we had engineers, we had nurses, we had any kind of career field, civilian side. So
cool.
As far as networking goes, the reserves is excellent for kind of branching out and getting to know other people and different jobs.
Got your connections there.
For sure.
So how does AFROTC differ from being enlisted?
So I would kind of relate the GMC years to being enlisted. Those are you're building your military bearing. You're kind of learning the ropes of the military, similarly to like an airman in the Air Force. I think once you kind of hit that POC level, that's when it starts to really differentiate. You start looking at more big picture and being more of a supervisor. Those are some ways it kind of differs, and then obviously curriculum and stuff you learn along the way differs quite a bit. So
Was drill different from what you did for basic and
Absolutely.
stuff like that?
So the basics were obviously similar, but when it comes to leading the flight, it's a totally different ball game than when in basic training it was kind of do a command from your MTI, your military training instructor. It kind of goes from just kind of being a part of the flight to now as a POC, as a GMC, you're learning to be up front and being a leader.
Mm-hmm.
So you obviously talked about some differences between basic and just GMC years. What's your difference between basic and field training for you, since you just went through that with us?
Yeah.
So basic training is a marathon and field training is a sprint. That's kind of the best way I like to describe it. Basic training, it's all building blocks. From day one to the last day, you're becoming an airman, and that's every day that you go through, you're leading up to being an excellent follower. Whereas field training is you show up day one and you're expected to be a leader, and it's a short 2 weeks. I guess it feels long to some, but it really is. It really is like a sprint in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
2 weeks, constant evaluation, so it's a little more stressful in that regard. But I would say that as far as military training and what I actually feel like really made me into who I am was the basic training experience. It was intense. It was long, and I learned a lot about different people. Different NCOs would come and talk to us, day in, day out. It was great. It was a really cool experience. And then, by the end of it, all these people in your flight are like your brothers.
Yeah. So I know we had like so much evaluation at field training. Did you have that like same feeling like when you went to basic? Because we obviously don't know anything about that.
So not necessarily. They would do progress checks to an extent, but nothing formal evaluation at field training. And we really only had one or two like large leadership positions. I guess the two big ones, we had a dorm chief who was pretty much just in charge of our entire bay for our dorm, kind of like at field training, how we stayed in those bays this year at Camp Shelby. So it's kind of that same aspect where you have your dorm chief, and then also you had like an academic chief, or I don't even remember what it was called, but they kind of led the academics every day, and it was more classroom oriented.
So it was like the dorm chiefs, like similar to how we would have like maybe our, I guess would say stando, so like they would ensure everything's in line in the bay and stuff.
Somewhat, and we'd kind of split it up with element leaders. So those element leaders would have their row of beds, and dorm chief was essentially your like flight commander.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So they were the head person. If they needed something, like our MTIs needed to talk about something, they'd call the dorm chief, and that's who would go and talk with them.
Did a lot of people wash out during, or was it mostly everyone graduated?
I know we had a few people get recycled, which means they would go back like a week.
Do they have like different encampments like running at the same time?
Right.
So that way they can just...
Basically, they'd say, all right, something happened maybe this week. I know some people got held back for like failing the fitness assessment. Gotcha. So they'd go back like a week in order to catch back up and give another shot at it. Because once our flight got through something, like we'd move on. Like we can't like wait for someone.
Yeah.
So
right.
It was kind of the same thing in my technical training school. I think it happened more so there than in basic training.
Mm-hmm. So like going to basic, you showed up. Like what did you know like at that point about the military?
So I don't really come from a military family. Neither my parents served. My grandparents did. Both my grandpas, but really didn't talk with them a whole lot about it. So one thing I kind of got lucky is they did a program in the reserves. So when I signed my contract, I waited a few months before I actually left for basic training. And during that time, I would go to Wright-Patterson. That was the base that I was a reservist at. I would go there and we'd go over like pre-basic training. Like we'd do it was like their development flight, and you'd be there with trainees that haven't gone to basic training yet, and you'd go there, they'd teach you facing movements, the Airman's Creed, Air Force song, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So it was actually beneficial. You could tell that the reservists and guard individuals typically had a better grasp of the stuff, but whereas the active duty, they kind of would sign in and just go straight there, and that's where they'd learn it all.
So the active duty never really had that time to prepare or anything like that?
Yeah, because unless their recruiting officer like helped them out, but most of the time they just learn there.
Yeah, it seems like for basic, it's really kind of like, what it's called, basic training. Right, whereas for field training, it's not really what it's called. Like field training, not really.
Yeah.
It's like more of a field evaluation.
I know. I've talked to people who like went to basic. Like I know some people pretty close, and they're like, they basically start you from the basics. So they'll build, basically work you down to build you back up the way they need you. The Air Force needs you to be. Absolutely. I don't know if that's how you feel like it was, or.
Right. No, that's. Day like first week, I don't know what day it was. I'm trying to forget, but one of the days, first days there, they shave your head for the guys, and that's kind of the defining moment of okay, I'm not my own person anymore. We're hitting this together. So.
And we kind of do a similar thing, like in AFROTC, I'd say, like, you have to cut your hair, and everyone has to look the same, wear the same uniform. We're called by our last names, and I would say like the main purpose in that is probably like to gain ability to be disciplined and also to like build good wingmanship with your people.
Oh, for sure, 100%. So, since we talked a lot about being enlisted, why did you want to become an officer instead of continue down the enlisted track?
Honestly, I didn't really think I would re-enlist. My defining moment was my deployment, where I knew I kind of wanted to either make a career out of this or look at staying in longer. The choice to become an officer came from some mentors, and then also just knowing that I could make more of a difference as an officer. Because at the end of the day, like, the Air Force has done a whole lot for me, professionally, personally, academically. It's made me an extremely well-rounded person. I feel like this is my way of giving back, making a difference in our Air Force. So for me, knowing that I was wanting to stay in, it was more of a beneficial thing for me to become an officer.
That makes sense.
So you were gonna switch from being like reservist to try to be active duty,
right.
One way or another.
Yeah, I think the thought had crossed my mind. With me, anytime I've done anything military related, Air Force related, it never feels like work. It's kind of, it's a lifestyle. You've probably heard that a million times, but you wake up and you're excited to go in, like, regardless. Like, you might have a bad day here and there, but at the end of the day, it's better than a lot of, like, civilian jobs that, I'm 24 now, so a lot of my friends, they're kind of working jobs they don't like, or, bouncing around between careers. It's definitely nice having that job security as well.
Oh, for sure, especially since COVID, a lot of people, like, lost their jobs and had to struggle to figure out what they wanted. Like, people had burnout, at least in healthcare, they had such a high burnout rate. There was a statistic I just read literally today. It was like 63% of nurses had burnout in the past year because of COVID. So and being a full-time co-op, like, intern, kind of like getting to work in the engineering industry kind of allows me to see into that world, and can definitely be boring sometimes. So being able to go serve, I think, gives me a little bit of hope about like having some variety in my life. Yeah, same. Especially for me, is like having a nursing degree but not going into nursing even for a while. I didn't notice that, but then I'm like, I kind of take this as an opportunity to learn and continue to grow at this point.
So you talked about being deployed. Where have you been, and what have you learned from being deployed?
All right. So my major mobilization or deployment was to Ali Al-Salim Air Base in Kuwait. We stayed there, and then I worked at a different base, actually, so I traveled between bases for work. Definitely the overarching theme that I learned was a lot of it was from leadership. It can make or break a deployment, and that's no doubt. I remember getting there, and the rotation before us, you could tell they were burnt out, didn't really want to be there, didn't really care for the mission. They just were done. And I get that. It's tough to go and work in the Middle East for 6 months at a time.
Is that how long your deployment was?
Yep. I was there 6 months. I think my total orders were like 8 months with training and some other things. I think they attached leave on the end of it in the reserves.
Oh, that's
nice.
So it was nice. Yeah. But what I kind of realized is when we got there and a few months in, like, our leadership really took care of us, and that's what made the difference for what I could see. They came out and did post checks. They'd come out to the patrols or the gates, and they actually cared about what we were doing and made sure we had our equipment, made sure things were running properly. So it set the tone kind of right off the bat to have leadership that cared for you, and that's kind of, like I alluded to before, why I wanted to commission to be an officer.
Yeah. So did you work with like younger officers, so like second lieutenants and first lieutenants, or? So
not at all, actually, in my reserve career. I think the only second lieutenants, first lieutenants I dealt with were from PA, and they'd like come with us to do like heavy weapons training. They'd obviously take pictures. But other than that, like, obviously a squadron commander, and we didn't even have a DO or a director. What was it called?
Of operations.
Director of operations. Yeah. We didn't even have like a captain like that. And at one point, our commander was a captain, so. Okay. It was kind of strange. So, but he was prior enlisted too, and he's one of the mentors I have. But it was kind of odd, like, coming from, most of my duties were enlisted, and I would never see officers, like, ever. And then coming to Afratsi, where we have the cadre, more officers and more involvement there. So it was interesting to kind of switch from never really seeing in them to now, like, every day you're dealing with learning and training with them.
Talking to them.
So your perspective definitely changes once you branch away from that. So that was like one of the defining moments for AFROTS, where I was like, okay, everything's started to become clear as far as like big picture thinking. And
Yeah, I figured you see maybe like 1 or 2 second lieutenants or like a younger officer. So
yep, they always joke with my old base. They said once I commission, I need to come back and be a lieutenant with them. I was like, no way.
you're like, I'll pass.
No.
That's funny though. So, is there any advice you would give to an AFROTS cadet about being an officer from the enlisted side?
Definitely listen to what the enlisted say. Oftentimes, you have your subject matter experts. Those are going to be your enlisted folk, really the ones doing the job. So when you make your decisions, always kind of keep them in the back of your mind, and understand that they're the ones that are going to be obviously affected by some of your decisions. So always kind of keep them in your mind. And something that I always felt that is, as a good leader or Air Force, regardless of rank, something to keep in mind is always look to be the supervisor that you wish you had. So the way I kind of look at it is, we're all going to be lieutenants, here in this near future. Once we get to that captain or that major, remember what it's like to be that lieutenant and try to be as beneficial and helpful to them as you can. Give them the tools that they need to be successful. And that's really kind of how you keep the force, expanding and building off of each other, because you don't want people making the same mistakes that you made.
Yeah, so just like always thinking back to like you in like a position where you were on a team and you had a leader, and like what would you want from that?
Right.
I feel like I learned that lesson at field training a little bit.
Oh yeah.
The better follower you were, the better grasp you had on like what a good leader would be for a group of engaged followers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know for a fact that like, you'll be sitting around or thinking like, as someone like tells you to do something, or like they're in charge and you're like, man, I will never do that, or like, I'm not gonna do something like that, because you're just like, why would I make somebody do something I don't want? And I realized that like that's how I would act as a leader, is just like kind of taking those experiences, kind of like you said. And
yep. Putting yourself in their shoes is really big.
Yeah, for sure.
What has been your favorite thing about being an AFROTSy?
Honestly, I really enjoyed field training.
Really?
It like...
Honestly, I enjoyed it too.
Right.
Yeah.
So it sounds weird, but it was so like, it was kind of a defining moment for me to realize that having gone through basic, I obviously had like a certain like skill set as far as like dealing with that stressor of yelling or elevated tone. Dealing with that side of stress, factor kind of went out the window when I got there. Like I've gone through that, I understand it. It was such like a mentorship-based leadership style for me. Like that's what I did. I'll never forget, there was one moment where in basic training I got smoked. I got yelled at so bad for leaving my security drawer unlocked.
Sounds familiar.
And in field training, as we were leaving the dorms one day, I noticed that one of the cadets had forgot their lock and threw it on their bed. So I grabbed it and put it on there, and I let him know like afterwards. I was like, hey, like you left it unlocked. Like here's why. Like this is like I got chewed out in basic training for this, and that was always one of those lessons that really stuck with me. It was like, if we can't trust you to lock up this drawer, how can we trust you to guard this aircraft? So it was kind of those like that. Sense. It goes like full circle in that sense, where now I'm like, okay, I'm able to mentor these cadets and help them out, because I could have just been like, oh, he can learn the way I did. Yeah. But no, like that's not what you want to do as a leader. You want to help your wingman out and make sure that all right, you made a mistake, but like, hey, I got you. Like that's the kind of like leaders we need in the Air Force.
Yeah. It's kind of like a deja vu moment for you there. You're like,
it really was.
Oh no.
Right. Yeah, I feel like they try to train us that way from day one.
Absolutely.
It's all about wingmanship, and I think that was a huge focus for FTP. I know Cadet Lewis definitely really drilled teamwork.
Yep.
And we're not individuals, obviously. I'm sure you guys have heard that 1,000 times. Not individuals. Right. We're a team, because you can't get through it on your own. And I even made my cadets write an MFR on wingmanship for letting one of my cadets miss the worst deadline for my flight.
Oh, really?
So
I mean, you kind of have to know that team mentality is super important.
Yeah, I was saying during our initial evals, I tried to make it a point that, you know, you don't let your wingmen miss deadlines. You don't let your wingmen be uninformed. You are always checking to make sure, you know, everyone's on the same page, everyone's mission ready, because, you know, you're only as good as your weakest member. And, you know, when you face a fight, everyone needs to be ready. Everyone needs to be at the top of their game. And, you know, that comes all the way down to, did you do the wars on time? Did you get it? Did you miss that deadline? And I had some cadets miss it the first week. I was like, okay, don't let it happen again. And then we had another cadet miss it. So I was like, all right, MFR and wingmanship. But it also kind of served as a MFR, like intro to MFR writing. So
yeah, both of those are important because, I mean, MFRs never go away.
Yeah.
The better you are, the easier it makes everything for that. But no, yeah, the wingmanship, like, never goes away no matter what side of the military you're on, enlisted or officer, because you got to help them out no matter what you're at.
Yeah, and I think that's what I like so much about the Air Force and kind of, like, the armed forces in general. I feel like I've really learned a new definition of service before self. Really, like, whatever you do even, like, just in the wing, like our wing jobs, you know, it's all for someone else. Like, it's to make our wing better in general, to train people, to get people through field training, to get all of us organizational leadership skills, and to commission us one day so that way we can help the big real Air Force. So I mean, I feel like everything we do all goes back to service before self, and it's really starts the very core of being a good wingman.
That's why we all learned the 3 core values, right?
Right. Yeah. We're still learning that one.
Our last and final question is, what's your favorite memory while you had when you were enlisted?
Kind of two come to mind, or 2 different topics. Favorite memories were definitely all the traveling I did. So I went to Germany, went to Egypt, spent some time with guitar. On the way to Egypt, just for like 5 days, but it still was a cool experience. And then Kuwait. Favorite of those was probably my Egypt one. It was pretty funny. I volunteered for this forward deployment out of Kuwait, and they were kind of saying, like, oh, it's probably going to be intense, it's probably going to be kind of not fun, MREs. And then we get there and we stayed in a 5-star hotel for 14 days and only worked a handful of days.
So they were like messing with you.
So mad. Now I see why the Army makes fun of us.
Right. We always joked about, like, we all lived, or like the 5 of us that went, we lived like pilots for that 2 weeks. So it was really cool, and I got to see the pyramids too. So
that's amazing.
One of the cool perks about, you know, when you travel somewhere, you time off, you can usually get out and see the land. So it's definitely a perk. And then secondly, just the people I met along the way. I have people that, like I said, mentored me, people I could call today if I ever need anything, like personally, like need help with something. So you make lifelong friends, and your wingmen truly are that. They're always there for you, even when you get out.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's so cool, though. All right. Thank you, Cadet Brown, for spending your time with us answering questions about being enlisted and doing ROTC with it. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Cadet Brown. I don't know as much, but if you have any questions about PDT stuff, but we'd be happy to continue the conversation.
Okay, Aircats, remember to fly, fight, and win, and we will catch you next time on Aircast.